Well, I'm very thankful to Jordan Peterson, who insisted that we should meet. Dr. Warren Farrell, we're here in your home in California. You are a remarkable academic by any stretch of the imagination. You're an author, you're a public intellectual. You've been very active on the question of relations between men and women. You've also been politically active. You ran for governor as a Democratic candidate here in California. You were supportive of Hillary Clinton's bid for the White House. You've been active on gun controls. But perhaps nowhere have you become better known than as perhaps America's best known male feminist in the 1970s. You've always been very interested in the role or the roles between men and women. But now you've written a remarkable book warning us that our boys are in crisis. And in fact, that's what you've called it, the boy crisis. It's packed with research that's dense to the point where you can't deny that it has to be grappled with. It can't be pushed under the carpet, and it's very confronting.
Indeed. Yes, I was really increasingly shocked when I saw that the boy crisis was a global crisis, that it's in all 56 of the largest developed nations. Our boys are falling behind our girls in every academic subject, especially in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of success. And so I started to say, well, what is there about the developed nations that is so, that is leading to boys doing so poorly? And so what I began to see is a bit ironic is that, we all want to have survival, not be controlling our lives. And developed nations have done a good job helping, usually with capitalism, helping people move forward and not having to be dictated every minute by survival. And so that survival, the good news is that it creates new freedoms. The bad news is the unintended consequences of some of those freedoms. And one of those freedoms is the freedom to divorce. And another freedom is the freedom to have children without being married. And so among divorced couples, a very high percentage of them do not have a lot of father involvement, either no father involvement or very minimal father involvement. And there, both the children are doing much worse than the ones that have both father and mother involvement. And so those children, especially the boys who have minimal or no father involvement, are really part of the boy crisis. I began to see that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. The other group where that's true of was women who are under 30 who have children without being married. And so when women who are under 30 have children without being married, which is 53% of the women under 30 who have children in the United States are not married, the children and often the woman doesn't know who the father is, or they know that the children know the father very minimally, or when the father and mother live together, when the mother and father have the child, the average time of the father's involvement is only 4 years. And so those children often feel abandoned by their father. And the boys in particular, they look in the mirror, and if they hear negative things about their father, or after a divorce or their breakup, let's say they hear that the father's a liar or a narcissist or irresponsible, the boy looks in the mirror and he sees, well, maybe my body language is like my dad's. Maybe I'm inherently a narcissist, or I'm irresponsible, or I'm a liar. And of course, we're all narcissists, irresponsible, or a liar to some degree. And so you pick up that part of you, and that boy starts worrying about himself being that way. But I also started to see that, what is there about fathers that is so important? I didn't, I knew that fathers were important, but I didn't have a clue that the absence of a father for a boy in particular leads to a boy having problems in more than 50 areas, leads to a girl having problems in more than 50 areas, but a boy is more likely to have those problems be more severe, more likely to result in suicide, severe depression, addiction to opioids and death by opioids, and these types of disastrous problems, or the boy becoming so dysfunctional and ashamed of his own lack of success that he becomes angry at the fact that his teachers aren't giving him any positive feedback, his peers are not paying attention to him. And for boys, when it comes to boy-girl time, if he feels he's a sensitive boy, and his mother oftentimes will help him see how sensitive and caring he is, because his mother is usually very sensitive to him. And then that boy is sensitive and then is being rejected by girls, because girls tend to date winners, not losers. And he's now experiencing himself as a loser because he doesn't accomplish things very well. He then becomes angry and hurt and withdrawn. And if the video game addiction doesn't satisfy him, or the alcoholism or the drugs don't satisfy him, he can turn to porn, which will addict him to girls and women as objects rather than as real people. And which leads to more rejection by the girls, who feel treated as objects because they're being treated as objects. And so all of these things happen, and those are the boys that are set up for the mass shooters, for not having a good role model in their dad, so they look to ISIS or some other larger sense of purpose that their dad didn't provide, or they become our prisoners. In the United States, 93% of the prison population is male, and about 90% of that group is dad-deprived males. And as with mass shooters, about 85% are dad-deprived males as well. And then we have among the ISIS recruits, about 80 to 90% are not only males, but dad-deprived males.
So Warren, these things are, I think, incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But before we go any further, let's establish that both of us are delighted to see that girls are doing very, very well in a whole range of ways, including something you don't hear much about, particularly under 30s. I think you say in 147 cities in America, in your book, your studies reveal, they are earning on average 8% more than young men of that age. Yes. So this is not about a boy versus girl thing at all. Let's say that right up front. We both would rejoice.
Yes, oh, absolutely. John and I, between the two of us, have 5 daughters, and I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City for 3 years, and spoke all around the world on the importance of women's issues. And to me, women, for me, you have to be pro-female and pro-male if you're pro-human. For me, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And so my job has been to make sure that the first part of my life was focused on making sure that women were powerful in the workplace, they weren't discriminated against in the workplace. I'm very happy that with #MeToo movement allowed women to be able to speak up and tell their truths. But I've also come to understand that #MeToo needs to not be a monologue, it needs to be a dialogue. The way that the sexes will move forward is both sexes listening to each other. For years, I spoke around the world, and I did role reversal experiences. I said to every woman, to every man and woman in the audience, I said, men, if you really came here to understand women, you got to understand that every woman is in a beauty contest every day of her life. And if you want women if you want to really understand women, you've got to be in that beauty contest and experience what that's like. So I had every man in the audience, sometimes 500 men, come up on stage and flood the aisles and all go through. The women created a sort of an arch through which the guys would go through. And then the women would choose, they would be the judges in the beauty contest. And they would choose the guys that they felt they were most attracted to and why. And then we did moral virtue questions. And then we did talent. And the guys said at the end, I had this extraordinary experience, which is that every part of me wanted to win this beauty contest and wanted to have my body be the one that was chosen as number one. And every part of me was angry that I was only being looked at for my beauty. And the women would say, wow, thank you. That's exactly what we go through. But then I said, okay, this is a role reversal experience. We're both going to support each other and understand each other. And so the women, I then programmed the women to ask out the guys they were most attracted to and worked with the men to only be responsive to the girls and women who were earning the most money, who could support the children in a style to which they would like their children to become accustomed by going to good schools and good neighborhoods and so on. And I really worked on the guys with that. I had the women sit in rows according to how much money they would earn 5 to 10 years after graduation, and the professors and so on sit in rows accordingly. And I really worked with the guys to not just go for the women in the back rows that were sometimes the most attractive, but just to stay with the women in the front rows. And of course, this is all an exaggeration, but it helped the guys in a short period of time realize that they had a responsibility to their children. And then the women asked the guys out, and because the guys had now, I tried to get the women addicted to the most attractive guys. The women were now feeling a certain level of status and addiction by asking out the most attractive guys. So there were often 8 or 9 women competing for the beauty contest winner or one of the finalists. And so the women afterwards, processing the experience, said, up until now in my life, every time I've used the word jerk, it's applied to a male. But this time, I realized I had 9 other women competing with me. So I started exaggerating that I had a Porsche. I don't have a Porsche. I said I'd take him out to the nicest restaurant. I have no idea how much it costs. I just know it costs a lot more than I could afford. And then when he still wasn't coming out with me, I physically took the boy by his arm and pulled him away from my competition. I was really a jerk. And I realized that, the jerk, instead of my sort of blaming men for being just jerks, I should realize that this is what I did as soon as I feared being rejected. And that being that jerk is a compensation for rejection. It's a way of not being rejected. And so, and the guy that I pulled away physically was sort of delighted to be relieved of all the competition. And so my physical pulling him away, my exaggeration of my money and things that I could do for him, all won the day, which is really deeply sad. And the guy said, thank you. You've got it. This is the dilemma that we're in. And we're rewarded for being what, taken just a little bit too far, would lead us to being validly described as a jerk.
So what I think I hear you saying more, that jumps out at me anyway, is the old Irish saying, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. We've just simply got to try and understand where each of us are coming from in this modern dynamic, particularly, I think, where we're absorbed so much with personal autonomy. We've got this idea that we're each the centre of our own universe. Yes. And that life is, as Jonathan Haidt puts it, a battle between good people and bad people. To draw that line between good and bad, between the sexes, is a big mistake. And as you've just said, and you say with John Gray, your co-author and the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, it bears repeating. Whenever only one sex wins, both sexes lose. But you must run into this quite often. You move around the country. Mm-hmm. I'm on your mailing list. Mm-hmm. I often hear about the various events that you're speaking at. Mm-hmm. So you explain these things. How do people react when they're confronted with an uncomfortable reality? Particularly in an age when I think there's been serious misunderstanding between the sexes, and there's a fair bit of anger out there. I mean, I've heard women that I really appreciate saying, well, maybe it's time the pendulum did swing a bit too hard, mm-hmm, so that these blokes sort of, they need to know what we went through.
Yes. And the women are saying basically, I really don't feel badly that the men are now walking a mile in my moccasins historically.
Yeah.
And so there's a number of aspects of that. I started doing couples communication workshops around the country. And I started that in part because I started to see that if I care about the boy crisis usually results as a result of a divorce. The divorce often comes from men and women not understanding each other in marriage. And so I didn't want to be in a position of advocating that there be tougher legal restrictions on people being divorced. I wanted people to be happy when they were married. And so I started looking more carefully about why do couples end up having bad marriages. And the single biggest reason is that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so knowing that, both sexes start walking on eggshells, saying, I don't want to bring this up because my wife or husband will just, respond defensively. We'll just get into an argument. So you keep it to yourself, and you keep it to yourself, and you keep it to yourself.
And you take it to work.
Take it to work. It may become cancer. It may become a heart attack. It may become stress in various ways. It may lead to drinking. It may lead to drugs. It certainly will lead to affairs. And then those things, of course, create a greater breakup in the marriage. And then the children are devastated by the loss usually of the father, but if it's the mother that's lost, the children are devastated by that as well. And so the workshops I do train people to be able to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. However, it is biologically natural to become defensive when you're criticized. And so I really had to develop a workaround to the biologically natural propensity to become defensive when you're criticized.
So again, now to pursue a couple of these issues, you've worked through some staggering numbers on the result of divorce in terms of the increase in the number of children now who are growing up without their fathers. It's quite extraordinary in America. And as you say, this pattern is basically replicated across all of the wealthy countries.
Yes. It's so to give you an example, back in 1965, there was a fellow named Daniel Moynihan who was a U.S. senator and an sociologist and worked for both Democratic and liberal presidents. And he was assigned to do something that ended up being called in common terms the Moynihan Report. And it looked at inner cities and said, why are we having all these crimes and so on in the inner cities? And and everybody was thinking, oh dear, they're going to come up with, blacks are, inferior. But he came up with something very different. He came up with those African-American families where there were no fathers involved. Those were the families that were having the problems. But in 1965, that was 25% of African-American families where there was minimal or no fathers in the family. Today, 3% of the Caucasian families have minimal or no father involvement. Among African-American families, the percentage has moved up into the mid-70s. And so we have this enormous problem with a lack of fathers. And in those communities where there is a minimal or no father involvement, or there's a divorce where there was father involvement, and now there's a divorce and the children only see the fathers once every a couple of weekends or so, those children feel abandoned by the father, and the father isn't able to enforce the boundaries with his children and teach them why, and have the children survive that boundary enforcement and have that be enforced from day to day because he doesn't have enough time. Or the father lets the child go to the playground, and at the playground the child picks up a basketball game, and the child gets into a fight, and one of the kids there at the playground was a bully and pushed him over, and so the boy comes home with a scraped arm and maybe a black eye, and the father but then the mother picks the child up for from quote visitation, which by itself is a problematic term. And then brings the child home and says, how did you get this scraped elbow and the black eye? Oh, I got into a fight at the playground. What? You were at the playground by yourself? Where was your dad? Well, he was watching the playoffs. Aha, says the mother. The father cares more about the playoffs than he does about you. I'm really afraid to leave my father with you, with your dad in the future. No, it was okay, Mom. No, that doesn't settle it for the mom. What is not explained to the mom is that from the dad's perspective, getting into a fight on the playground was no problem, as long as, assuming that it wasn't something super serious. But then if the child comes home and is picked up by the mom, the dad doesn't have a chance to talk with the boy about what happened on that playground. When did you first see the red flag of a boy being a bully? And maybe you were offered a drink, and maybe one boy pushed around another boy. Usually there are signs of those things. things. And so the father sees his job as letting the child have the experience, letting the child sometimes have a bad experience, then talking with the child about that bad experience to prevent that child from having bad experiences in the future, knowing that a real life experience is a lot more efficacious in terms of raising a child well and protecting a child in the long run than protecting a child and protecting the child and going to the playground with the child and saying, no, don't play with that person, play with play with this person instead, and then suddenly have the child go out into life when she or he didn't have any real chance to have the experience of doing things wrong and being protected. But dads don't explain that to moms. Dads don't even know what they're doing consciously. They don't read in parenting books, the value of what their contribution is, so they can't explain it to mom. Moms can't hear what dads don't say. So moms are not at fault, and dads aren't at fault because we don't have a culture that helps dads understand that the things that are intuitive for you, letting that child take some risks, letting that child get out of its comfort zones, enforcing boundaries with that child, roughhousing with the child. These are all things that come intuitively to dads. And every single one of them, when I did the research for the boy crisis, I found over and over again that they all have very positive values that I would never have known that the more a child roughhouses with dads, a girl or boy child, by the way, roughhouses with a dad, the more that child is likely to be empathetic toward his brother and sister. The more that child is likely to be able to distinguish being assertive from being aggressive. He's able to be empathetic because the father usually will form a bond with the children through the roughhousing. And then when the children start fighting with each other, the father will often say, "Yeah, sweetie, that was great that you got on top and you won in the roughhousing battle, or you pinned me down in the wrestling match. But it's not okay that you did that by putting your elbow in your sister's face. And if you do that again, we're going to stop the roughhousing." Okay, Dad, no problem. But then they go back to the roughhousing. The children do it again. Then the father stops the roughhousing. And then it's the next night that they roughhouse that the children begin to realize, if I don't pay attention to my brothers and sisters' feelings and needs, I'm going to lose what I want, the roughhousing. That's when they begin to develop empathy by the discipline of knowing they're going to lose what they want if they don't think of what other people want. Children just don't naturally become empathetic when they're catered to. The more empathetic the parents are to any given child, the more self-centered and narcissistic the child becomes because her or his needs are always being thought of. So empathetic parents do not create empathetic children beyond a certain degree. The empathy is important from a parent, but you take it too far and it creates the opposite. It creates children that are very self-centered.
Just to tease out this roughhousing with kids bit, you write in the book that kids can learn a great deal through that, and boys in particular can learn a fair bit about how to set boundaries for themselves, how to delay gratification, how to be responsible when it comes to setting their own boundaries later in life. Yeah. And that's relevant in the context of what we've seen with some of these horrendous shootings and so forth in this country.
Absolutely. Almost always the boys that do these mass shootings that end up in prison, that end up joining ISIS, they're usually males. They're usually boys that have minimal or no father involvement. And so their heart doesn't have that feeling of love by fathers, and they don't have their testosterone channeled by a male toward a good purpose. And so they feel they feel like they have a hole in their heart oftentimes. But there's also something else going on that's much more practical. I was talking about roughhousing before, and a lot of people say, oh, the example that I gave with roughhousing has to do a lot with boundary enforcement. The father saying, no, there will be no more roughhousing unless you think of your sister's needs, unless you understand the difference between that push, which was aggressive, versus a softer push, which is leverage and assertive. That's okay. And it comes from experiences like that. But I find a lot of people get confused with the term boundary enforcement versus boundary setting. So moms are often very good at boundary setting. They'll say your bedtime needs to be 9 o'clock. Dads tend to be more likely to do the boundary enforcement in a tougher type of way. They'll say your bedtime is 9:30, and so it is statistically true that dads, when they're parenting, set bedtimes that are later than mom's bedtimes. But it's also statistically true that the children with dads get to bed sooner than they do with the
Is that
children with
right?
moms. Yes, exactly.
Really?
And one of the differences between boundary setting versus boundary enforcement. So dads will be more likely to say, okay, your bedtime is, let's say, 9:30, but you have to have your homework and everything else done. And if you get everything done, the chores, et cetera, done well, we can have the time before 9:30 can be your time, and I'll do anything you want, including roughhousing. Mother's going, you must be kidding. You're not going to roughhouse before bedtime. And dad will say, just let me handle it. But when dads do handle it, they find that the children focus on getting everything done. And then they usually do, the first few times they do sloppy homework just to get it done quickly. Then the father says, you do sloppy homework again. Then there'll be no free time at all. And then the child eventually learns to do the homework well, to brush the teeth well, do all the things their responsibilities well, and still have enough time left over before that 9:30 time. And then, whereas with the mother, the child will learn more frequently to just put things off a little bit, and then it comes to be 9 o'clock, the bedtime that mama set, and the child goes, well, I didn't finish my homework yet. And mom goes, oh, I don't want him to go in without the homework being done, so let's work on that homework. Well, mom, I did the homework. Now can I have a story? And then it becomes 9:45 or 10 o'clock. And so that gives you a little bit of an example of that. But let me give a clearer example of boundary setting versus boundary enforcement. Moms and dads, by the way, all of these things are reversed with some parents. Some dads are like moms and some moms are like dads. But dads and moms will both tend to say, sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And so that's the boundary setting. And the children, of course, will do the boundary testing, have as few peas as possible before they get their ice cream, of course. And the difference is in the boundary enforcement. With moms, the child will be likely to say something like, Mom, I got bullied again in school today. I feel really badly. Could maybe I have my ice cream sooner? And mom will think to herself, I don't want to get into a huge fight over a few peas when it's been a bad day. So, okay, sweetie, I'll tell you what, have this, maybe 20 more peas, and she'll take a knife and set aside those 20 peas. And then the child will realize unconsciously, I can manipulate a better deal here with appealing to mom's certain sensitivities, whatever they are, and then try to have 10 peas. And then mom will go, all right, you had the 10 peas, at least you tried. Okay, you can have your ice cream now. Dad is more likely to say, excuse me, we had a deal here. The deal here is you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. Oh, Dad, you're so mean. Mom doesn't do this. Well, this is my rules, and if you continue whining and complaining, there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either. And then the child goes, oh, shoot. With Dad, I've got to actually finish my ice cream. Finish my peas before I get my ice cream. And so the child with Dad learns, and this is all unconscious, learns that I have to focus on doing what I need to do in order to finish the peas, in order to get what I want to have, the ice cream. The child is learning postponed gratification. We'll get to postponed gratification in a minute, but just to say at the outset, it is the single biggest predictor of being successful or a failure, being able to have postponed gratification. In this electronic age, that prediction is probably much greater than it used to be, because you're constantly being tempted to be sidetracked by the newest text or the newest invitation for a video game, et cetera. And so the child that has that postponed gratification is much less likely to have ADHD. So children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD in the United States. Children raised predominantly by moms, 30% have ADHD. Because if you look at that example, you can see that the child with the mom is learning not to finish, not to put its attention on what it needs to do, but it's learning to put its attention on how to manipulate a better deal so it doesn't need to do what it needs to do to get what it wants, the ice cream. Whereas with dad, the child has no choice but to focus on what she or he needs to do, finish the peas in order to get the ice cream. So you take that postponed gratification to school, and here's what happens. The child with the postponed gratification can finish their homework. The child with the postponed gratification may be a tall, good-looking, athletic child, but goes to school, and if he does not have postponed gratification, he can't do the drills that are necessary to be the best basketball player. So mom, or a musician or actor, and so mom may discover, typically moms are very sensitive to children's potential and children's dreams, and they may encourage the boy to, sweetie, you have a wonderful singing voice. Why don't you practice and be a good singer? And the child will go to practice, get maybe a tutor, but won't practice often enough to be one of the best. So she or he doesn't make the basketball team, doesn't make the skiing team or whatever, doesn't make the finalists for the play, and feels badly about himself. And here's the trick. Mom has encouraged the child to dream and pursue his dreams. That is wonderful. But when the child doesn't also have the discipline to pursue his or her dreams, she or he fails. And when the child continues to pursue dream after dream and fail time after time, after a while, the child becomes ashamed of himself or herself and becomes afraid to dream. And that's when a child begins to withdraw, feeling ashamed that every time she or he tries out, they're just the laughing stock because they always fail.
Yes, what you've just said is in the book, of course, and I found it remarkable that your research shows that perhaps we just haven't appreciated how solid many dads' instincts are when it comes to their contribution. I noticed with our kids, they look to mum from a very early age for warmth and nurture. It seemed, me for play and stimulation. All are necessary. But one of the things to draw out of this, I think, is that it would be good. There's a lot of support for women. There's a lot of ways in which they can go out and learn about their role, what the kids need from them. Governments even are in it.
Yes.
But we don't do the same. As you say, I was unaware of quite a bit of this research until I read the book.
Yes, absolutely. I'm working now with the White House, and one of the things I'm suggesting to them is to create, if you want to make America great again, you make the American family great again. And if you want to make the American family great again, you don't focus on no child left behind until you understand that a child will be left behind if you leave a parent behind. And so trying to create a program called No Parent Left Behind. But that means having to make sure that that males are trained well to be good fathers. So we're suggesting the creation of a father warrior program, because in the old days, boys' sense of purpose came from being warriors. But today, with a need for fewer boys in war, oftentimes boys have a purpose void. And when boys have a purpose void plus a dad void, that's when they often become destructive. And so I'm suggesting now that there be a father warrior program to begin to train boys to be involved with the family at a very early age, to know how to feed their sister when their sister is very young, or their brother when their brother is very young, to know how to babysit, to know how to communicate. I'm suggesting that in all elementary schools, there be one of the core curriculum that's required every year is communication skills training, so that boys don't bully other boys, so that boys can listen to girls, so that girls can listen to boys, so we know how to listen to each other and overcome those natural propensities just to be me, me, me. And the more the culture becomes me, 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 the more communication skills is important. So I'm looking at communication skills training in elementary schools, but also try to up to scale what I do around the country with communication skills training for couples, and saying you can have children trained to be good communicators and not to become undefensive to personal criticism, and then learn that at school, if they go home and they see their mother and father arguing defensively, they'll lose respect for their mother and father, and therefore the family will be destabilized in a different way. So you have to have good communication skills from parents, good communication skills from children, and then you have to have things like family dinner nights, so that mothers and fathers learn how to conduct a family dinner night, so it does not become a family dinner nightmare.
And look, there's a marvellous quote on this in your book. And, you know, as somebody who's a former legislator, it struck me as very significant. You said, next to war, nothing calls for the presence of government more than the absence of dad.
Yes.
And then you say, and nothing limits the need for the presence of government more than the presence of dad.
Precisely. And we started to expand government when we started to devalue dads.
It costs
and
us
the
a fortune
government became a substitute husband. Yes. And I estimated when I did the calculations for the boy crisis that it costs the U.S. government approximately $1 trillion a year. And I didn't even do all the ripple effects that I could have done to get to that $1 trillion price. But if you think of the costs in the United States, you know, the United States has the highest percentage of males in prison of any country, any major country in the world. And so but the cost of keeping males in prison nationwide to the degree that we have them is just a fortune. The cost of all the homeland security in response to preventing ourselves from having another 9/11 and an ISIS type of attack is enormous, and the restrictions of freedom are enormous. So if you want to reduce the size of government, if you want to reduce the control that government has in your life, then increase the efficacy of the family, make the American family great again, and create father warriors where boys learn that instead of having to do military service and to die and to kill and be killed abroad, it's now your opportunity to learn how to love and be loved at home.
Yeah, just on that issue of the cost, I was staggered to read again your research. The United States jail and prison population has increased by more than 700% between the mid-70s and now. Yes. Of that population, 93% are male, and they're disproportionately young. Yes. Even if you were so baseless to say that the only thing that matters as a taxpayer is money, yes, you'd have to say we've got to stop this lunacy.
Absolutely.
But you won't stop it by not sending them to jail. You'll stop it by helping them not be criminals in the first place.
That's exactly right. We have so much discussion in the United States about should it be rehabilitation in prison or should it be punishment in prison, and that's the wrong discussion. The discussion is how to prevent the boys from getting into prison to begin with. Yeah. And the answer, fortunately, is fairly easy. Number one is get fathers involved along with mothers. It's not like father's good, mother's bad. What children who do the best receive is what I call checks and balance parenting. Just like you need checks and balances in government, you may hate Republicans, you may hate Democrats, conservatives and liberals, but it really helps to have both having a dialogue about what's going on. And what checks and balance parenting is like this. Say the child comes up to mom and says, "Mom, can I go back and climb the tree?" "Sweetie, maybe in a few years, but not right now, you're too young." Goes to dad. "Can I climb the tree?" "Yeah, okay, but be careful, hon." "Wait a minute, I just told him you can't climb the tree." "Well, you're babying him too much. You're letting him risk falling out of the tree and getting a concussion. You want to be responsible for a child with a concussion? That's just cruel. You're insensitive." And then they have a dialogue about it. And if it's a good dialogue where they both hear each other, they might compromise and say, for example, okay, the child can climb the tree, but only up to a certain point, not beyond that. Not these branches, because those are too weak. And you've got to be out there under that tree and be willing to sort of shield them from any fall. And oh, by the way, give me your cell phone. So the dad, rolls his eyes. All right, but what the child gets is the experience of climbing the tree with a reasonable amount of risk taking. And no dad explains though to the mom, when that child climbs the tree, he actually increases his IQ. Have you ever heard a dad say that to a mom? But we now know that that's true, that the child's synapses are firing ferociously when they're trying to figure out which branch to go on and how far to go in that branch and what can I do to get higher without falling out of the tree. And so the child with that checks and balance parenting got the best of both worlds. He got the safety and the lack of concussion, and also got the experience of having that constant decision-making about where do I take the risk and where do I not take the risk. And that's the decision-making that helps a child feel comfortable with risk-taking. And if we look at one of the contributions that dads make to the parenting process is encouragement of risk taking. Going out into, skiing, you fall down, you hurt yourself, you cry, maybe I don't want to ski again. Sweetie, okay, I'll hug you here for a minute, but go back and try again. And that's a dad's, and that risk taking, when we don't allow fathers to do that, it hurts not only boys, but also girls.
Well, as part of that discussion, we now all need to have as parents and grandparents, is to look at this incredible research here that shows that with these societal changes, many desirable outcomes have emerged. Girls are doing a lot better. Mm-hmm. And a great deal of the things that were restrictive for them, that held them back, mm-hmm. prevented them from reaching their potential. Many of those ceilings have been smashed. Yeah. And you paint a picture of girls not being as badly damaged, still damaged mm-hmm. by family breakup. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think I have your numbers right. You say in the 147 American cities today, girls in their 30s will be, by about 8% on average, higher earners than boys. Yes. And this opens up all sorts of new challenges that hadn't been foreseen, not least of which is that many boys then don't feel there's a place for them. Their protector-provider instincts are compromised or not needed.
Absolutely. Girls don't.
Where do they go?
Girls don't go looking at unemployment lines for sensitive boys to become future fathers. They want boys who are good providers, and they want boys who are competent, and they want boys who are not part of the boy crisis, who are not failures to launch. And so attending to the boy crisis is one of the best things we can do for our daughters, because I want for my daughter as well.
Can you just say that again? Because I think that is an incredible line. Attending to the boy crisis.
Attending to the boy crisis is one of the very best things we can do for our daughters, because I want for my daughter to be able to marry a boy who is worthy of her love. And fortunately, my daughter, the daughter that's married, has a male who is definitely worthy of her love, one of the most loving, caring husbands, and a good breadwinner at the same time.
Well, we share that in common too.
Yes, you were telling me about your children too, and your son, and how proud you are of him. And I see your heart come through your eyes when you talk about your son and your grandson.
And son-in-law, I'm very thankful there, looking after my daughter. I'll get all mushy in a minute. Yes, but no, this is really important stuff.
2 males crying here, white-tailed males crying.
But it is really important, isn't it, that I think we understand that the message here is that we all lose when one sex loses, we all gain if boys are not doing as well, and we can start to correct that.
We in the feminist movement made a very serious error. An understandable error. We had come through the civil rights movement, where there was a group of oppressors and a group of oppressed. And then we went through Marxism being popular around the world, where there was oppressors and oppressed. And then we started looking at males and females, and we said in the feminist movement, well, men earn more money than women do. It didn't happen to usually be for the same work, although it was at one point that way. But therefore, men are the oppressors, women are the oppressed. And we didn't understand that the men, when they became fathers, that's when they started earning more money than women did. So today, it's not men that earn more money than women do. It is fathers that earn more money than mothers earn, because when they become fathers, they give up doing the things they want to do, like being a teacher, to become an administrator that almost nobody wants to be, because the administrator earns more. Or they quit education altogether to sell insurance, and they stop selling insurance locally because it makes more money to sell it nationwide. So they experience the father's catch-22, which is learning to love your family by being away from the love of your family. An experience you had as Deputy Prime Minister when you shared with me over lunch the amount of joy that you had and your children had when you said, I care more about my family than putting more time in as Deputy Prime Minister. And so many men feel they don't have the option to give up what they're selling that pays more, that they like less. And so we in the feminist movement never understood that men earning more money was not about male privilege. It was about male obligation. It was about male sacrifice. And instead of as feminists saying, men, thank you for when you had children, which sometimes you didn't even want, that you wanted them and you grew to love them, and you were willing to do things that didn't allow you to be connected with the children, so you could earn enough money so that your wife and your children would have a type of school system, a type of neighborhood that you wanted for them and they wanted for themselves. Thank you, men, for earning more money than women did, not for the same work, but for, as dads, giving up what you wanted to do what you needed to do. Thank you for feeling, and I understand, men, that you felt obligated to earn money that often somebody else spent while you died sooner. Thank you for that sacrifice.
There's something in the heart of this that is incredibly positive and encouraging, which is that, I mean, I think you'd acknowledge that, of course, there are men who have deliberately gone out there and said making money is more important than the kids. But you do paint, based on your research, this really, tremendous sort of picture that at heart men are, nobly committed to doing the right thing. Absolutely. Even if they often behave poorly in explaining it.
Yes.
And they're often not heard. But now, what I want to do is pursue this issue that comes through very clearly. Given that women are doing better in the workplace, earning better money, and it's terrific that the chains have been thrown off, but it does create a problem, to use language that I think you'd understand. I don't think you use it, but those sort of protector-provider instincts, the sort of the testosterone-loaded man who wants to slay the dragon, look after the family, defend them. There are not a lot of wars going around at the moment, and we hope they don't come back. I don't think we can guarantee that, but we hope they don't.
Yes.
It is a different world. And I've said this before, people who have watched these conversations will say, don't tell me he's going to refer to it again, but I watched Jordan Peterson in front of a live audience of mainly younger people, young men vastly overrepresented in Sydney. And what I saw there, because he was giving a tough message, Jordan wouldn't claim to be a rock star or a celluloid hero or whatever, but they were there hanging on every word, giving him standing ovations. And his message was a tough one. He was basically saying, lift your game, be noble, strive to be better.
Yes.
And there were young men wanting to respond to that. I think that's tremendously important.
Yes.
But how do we get them to clearly see their role in an age when they don't have to slay dragons?
That's why I'm saying to the White House, we need to create a father warrior program.
A father warrior program.
WARRIOR, warrior program. And that we need to give males a new sense of purpose. Instead of being the ones who are killed and killing overseas, we need fewer of men to do that. We still need men to do that, or people to do that. But we need many, many more men to be father warriors, to be trained from when they're very young, to communicate well, to care, to know that caring for their children will be something that will make them attractive. And we have to work with our daughters to be able to fall in love with men who are caring and loving and potentially full-time fathers even, or a certain part-time or full-time fathers.
You, in your book, say that the best parent is two parents.
Yes.
But you have very practical advice when it does go wrong.
Yes.
And for those who still want to make it work as well as possible. And I think it centres on things like communication, not moving too far apart, not making the mistake of saying, well, I'll get my kids out of here and we'll take them to a different part of the country and move them into a better school, but rather trying to make certain that there really is joint involvement in those children's lives. You paint that as very important.
Yes, I would say that one of the things I discovered in doing the research for the boy crisis is that there's what I would call 4 must-dos if you're going to be divorced. Must-do number 1 is that you have about an equal amount of involvement of the father and mother. Must do number 2 is that the father and mother live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so that the children do not resent the going to another parent's house and having to miss soccer practice or having to miss a birthday party of one of their best friends. Number 3 is that the child is not able to overhear any bad mouthing or detect any bad negative body language when the other parent is brought up, when the absent parent is being brought up, because the child then becomes afraid of speaking positively about the absent parent, and has to keep that whole other part of their life to themselves. Number 4, that there be consistent communication counseling or relationship counseling that the mother and father attend. It can be as little as once a month, but it shouldn't just be when there's an emergency, because emergencies force fast decisions to be made and prevent both the mother and father from understanding the best intent and the logic that leads to each person having a different way of making that decision. And you can disagree with your partner, but at least it's important to know that the woman or man that you divorced has a set of reasons that have the best intent of the child at heart, even though they may be different from your reasons. And the purpose of consistent communication counseling that is not emergency based is so that both parents can hear what is the reasons that allow them to see that even if I disagree with my wife or my former wife or former husband, that at least they have the best intent of that child at heart.
You're very strong on practical things that people can do. The issue of single mums seeking to do the best thing they can by their boys and their girls, what advice do you offer in a situation where they're really wondering how best to look after their kids' needs?
Well,
when there's no dad, there's no male there.
I'll get to the easy part first and then the tough part second. The easy part is the Cub Scouts, or the Australian equivalent of Cub Scouts, at least in the United States, and I'm sure in Australia too, getting young boys involved with other boys in a way that they're rewarded when they do things that are constructive and good. And also in Boy Scouts, boys learn the best of masculinity and the best of character development in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and organizations where there's a lot of boys together and they're learning how to be kind and loyal and have integrity and accomplish things. And they're getting merit badges for accomplishing things so that they have a certain amount of status for achieving things successfully. It's also important, if you're at all faith-based in your orientation, to seek out a faith-based community, to make sure that the leader of that faith-based community is a good, constructive, caring, loving, and able to connect male, but most important, that he gets your son involved with other boys his age, and facilitates those boys talking about what's behind their mask of masculinity. All boys have masks of masculinity that make them feel like they have to keep their feelings to themselves, but that makes them feel lonely and isolated and depressed. And so when boys hear that every other boy has the same insecurities that he has, it frees boys to not have to be destructive and to show off and to bully other boys in order to feel like they're a number one type of alpha male. So that's very important. It is crucial to get your son involved, even if he resists it, in sports, in 3 types of sports, what I call the liberal arts of sports. One is the team sports, which is number one and most important, for sort of obvious reasons, and that's wonderful preparation for teaching your son to get along in organizations, in corporations, in any group, profit or nonprofit, where working as a team is part of the what helps you to win and be successful and happy. Number 2 is pick up team sports. Pick up team sports where the boy goes to the school and picks up a game. That's perfect preparation for being a wonderful entrepreneur. So the boy has to say, okay, who do I want here? This is a stranger. How do I assess this stranger? Okay, do we play full court basketball or half court basketball? What are the parameters? What are the rules? Should we allow fouling? Should we not allow fouling? If so, by how much? When this boy tells me to pass the ball to him, is he somebody that just wants to show off, or does he have a good angle and a good shot to do? Is my girlfriend watching, and therefore I'm afraid to want to take the shot myself, even if he has a better angle. All these things are learned. Hundreds of lessons are learned from pickup team sports that have you that don't make you dependent on a supervisor to provide rules for you, but help you learn how to create your own rules. So pickup team sports in the United States is a huge left out phenomenon. And then last is individual sports like swimming or tennis or gymnastics, where you have a team that you're contributing to, but your discipline largely comes from disciplining yourself over and over and over again, repetitive, boring types of things like swimming hundreds of laps in order to be the best swimmer. And so all three of those, that creates self-starting skills. And so it's important to involve your son in all three sports. However, I said that's the easy stuff. The tough stuff is is many times when there's a divorce, a woman will get involved with and marry a man who becomes a stepdad. And so oftentimes she has to understand that a stepdad almost always feels like he can never be anything more than an advisor, unless there's plenty of permission created by the mom to understand dad-style parenting and to understand that its value is very important. So I would most advise reading the 10 steps, the 10 differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting in the Boy Crisis book, because so many moms have learned that the types of things that they thought were irresponsibility on the part of the father, like the roughhousing or letting the child play in the playground without supervision, are actually things that can be used by the right types of fathers toward really long-term benefits of the child. But that does not come naturally to the great majority of moms. And it doesn't come naturally to the great majority of dads to be able to explain that well to moms. And to dads that are listening, if you're a stepdad, you need to do your homework and lovingly explain to the mom what your contribution can be, and then also hear what her contribution can be, and do the checks and balance parenting of good communication about that. And then last, I would say, is being, when you're aware of those 9 differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, you've got to reassess the biological dad and say, are there things that he does naturally but hasn't explained to me that will make it valuable for him to be back in the child's life? Because the child looks, especially the boy child, looks in the mirror, and when he doesn't see his father and he feels abandoned by his father, the hole that creates and the sense of purposelessness that happens with so many boys that don't have dads has overwhelmed me with understanding the importance of the biological dad, because the boy is not the son of the stepdad. The boy is the son of the biological dad primarily. And so go out of your way to understand what that contribution is and how important that is to your son. Your daughter has her biological mother in you, and she has the ability to express feelings. Your son does not have his biological father, and he has the propensity to repress feelings. The repression of feelings and the absence of the dad is a terrible combination.
Warren, thank you. I think the things we've been talking about are absolutely critical to the survival of free and open, prosperous Western societies, the sort of society that I want to live in, and I want my children and grandchildren to live in. Finally, for the benefit of Australian viewers and just for information for you, we have in Australia the Fathering Project. I'm its national patron, and it was born at the University of Western Australia, Professor Bruce Robinson. Practical tips for dads who want to be involved but aren't quite sure how.
I can't think of anything that would be more important than a fathering project and a communication skills project. Those are the two most important things that would advance Western civilized best of society at this point in history.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wonderful way that you both asked questions and listened so carefully, and for caring as much as you do.
Doubly kind of you.